This is Elizabeth Lang-Barton of Certified Credit's Talk Data to Me podcast, and today I am joined by Chris Kimes and Benjamin Hoen of Weltman. How are you guys?
Great.
Good.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be here. It's always nice that the NBA had Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K, as our warm-up act, so we really appreciate that. It'll be tough shoes to follow.
How are you going to fill those shoes?
Well, we're going to try.
We're not.
We're going to try. We're just so interesting. So, I mean, consumer credit is just, such an interesting topic. I think that we'll be fine.
All right.
Well, gentlemen, as you alluded to, we're here today to talk about consumer credit, consumer debt, and foreclosures. Not necessarily the happiest conversation, but one that's important to our industry. And so let's just start off with, what are you guys seeing in the market right now when it comes to consumer debt, foreclosures, and the not so happy side of what we all do?
Sure. Let me start. Chris?
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
So this is Talk Data to Me, so let's throw out some data, right?
Yeah.
Consumer debt increased by $46 billion in the second quarter of 2022, which is the largest increase in a quarter in the past 20 years. There are some financial markers that you really want to look at when, and I'm not an economist. Boy, the economists were here yesterday, and they had some very bleak prognostications. I think they said that mortgages were going to go down about 10%. And I don't necessarily, although I'm not the economist, I'm just an attorney here, I don't necessarily share their prognostication, because I think there's some opportunity in the mortgage world because of consumer credit, as a matter of fact. One of the financial markers that we see, or that we saw in 2008, was that household debt was at about 100% of GDP per capita. That's where the market crashed. We're only at about 74% right now, which is a good marker.
Okay.
That, in part, is because people had the opportunity to pay down their debt during the pandemic, and consumer collections really did well during. Wouldn't you say that?
Absolutely. Payment plans, we were trying to help people. They had cash, and they really wanted to do the right thing.
Yeah, so consumer debt went down during the pandemic. A lot of people had money out there because of the stimulus and whatnot. But where is that leading us? Where is this huge increase in credit card debt, auto loans? Where is that going to take us? We all know those are high interest products, right?
Right.
We also hear at this conference that everybody's got equity, right? Well, what does equity translate into? Equity translates into home equity lines of credit at a somewhat lower interest rate than credit card debt with a higher interest rate. It's interesting. I have a friend who actually sells mortgages for one of the larger mortgage brokers. And I was having a conversation with him the other day, and I just asked him, I know things are down on originations. I said, how are things doing? What do you see for the future? And it was interesting. A salesman is always a salesman, right, Chris?
Of course.
So he starts going to do his spiel. He's like, well, people have credit card debt, and it's still cheaper to refinance into a mortgage product, even with the increasing interest rates. So that's where the opportunity for the mortgage industry is tapping out the equity. But what did we see in 2008? What did we learn? When you tap out the equity and you get to almost 100% of household debt to GDP, that's where we're going to tank. So although we're going to see, I think, an increase in, say, home equity lines of credit, refinances to get out of debt because people have that equity cushion, that's ultimately going to lead us to a place where it's a point of no return. And I think that's kind of the snowball effect that we're seeing because of the consumer credit market. And we haven't even started to talk about the student loan market yet.
Yeah.
Student loans are still in forbearance. According to the figures that I saw, 24 million borrowers are in forbearance, and 5.1 million are in default already.
Correct.
Right.
And those payments don't come back into play until January of 2023.
Well, we don't know what's going to happen with
The student loan forgiveness.
Correct.
Right.
That's still up in the air. And even with the forgiveness, you still have an average loan monthly loan payment of almost $400 per borrower. So that's going to eat into people's budgets. Once they have to start paying their student loans, once they have to start paying back their equity lines of credit that they're going to take out to pay back their credit card debt, we're going to be underwater. And
adding to that is credit card spend is way up, and it continues to go up month over month. So that's another indicator that's out there that's going to probably force us to do some things as consumers.
Right. So if we're looking at, let's say that next 6 months, a year, what are we going to see in this space? I mean, I know you're saying it looks bleak according to economists, but if we're talking about on the consumer side, on the lender side, what are you predicting based on what you guys are seeing?
Well, I think the advantage we have now over where we were in 2008 is we have better controls in place. Yeah. So lenders, consumer right advocates, lenders' attorneys, we all have a better understanding of how to get to resolution than we did in 2008 because there's a model. We can thank the CFPB for that. We can thank regulations for that. And that's a conversation for another time, really. But although I think we're going to see an increase in foreclosures, we're also going to see an increase in resolved foreclosures in a way that we did not see in the first foreclosure crisis. Okay. And, that's probably not something people are talking about here at the industry because we're really laser focused on mortgages.
Right.
And how consumer credit and consumer debt ties into all that is kind of in the peripheral, but it really has an impact, and I think that we're going to see that in the future.
So Ben, if I could ask you a question, because the firm also handles bankruptcies, are you seeing an increase in bankruptcies that might be an indicator that there'll be an increase in foreclosures?
So we have seen a slight uptick in bankruptcies recently. Bankruptcy is tied into the uptick in foreclosures. So once we start seeing the foreclosures increase, the natural progression of that is to see bankruptcies increase as well. People get into the situation where they have to decide, what am I going to pay? Am I going to pay my credit cards? Am I going to pay my mortgage? Am I going to put food on the table?
Right.
Let's talk about inflation, right? Yeah, exactly. Auto payments.
Correct.
Let's talk about inflation.
Right.
And I think the inflation is really the impetus pushing the consumer debt up. I mean, people have now exhausted all of the stimulus payments, and they're turning to credit cards. So.
Right.
I mean, and if you think about it, you're going to the grocery store now, just talking on something you need to live. You need food.
Absolutely.
You're going to the grocery store, and I'm an Aldi shopper. I am a budget grocery shopper, but even my bill has gone up significantly.
Absolutely.
Whenever my husband and I moved in together, my grocery bill for the week was $65 for two people. I'm now weekly looking at $150 or more. And our eating habits haven't changed. Our purchase habits haven't changed. So that's tying into that consumer debt.
Yes.
And so, Chris, on your side, what are you guys seeing?
I mean, we're seeing exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the pressure on the consumer is getting more and more. And to Ben's point, decisions are going to have to be made. I mean, we didn't bring the crystal ball. We should have. We'd make our prediction. We'd probably all be wrong. We thought this might have been way ahead of where it is already.
Yeah.
But something is going to happen. It may not be a 1 year. It might be a 2 year. But the trends are looking like it's going to be happening.
Okay. So what can we do as an industry to help those borrowers who may be struggling with that financial picture to ensure that, we continue to keep a stable market? We may see some of those foreclosures, but how do we reverse that? How do we start providing more financial education? Are these things that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And if I could share a Coach K-ism from this morning.
Already.
Communication is key, right? I mean, that is one of the things that we learned in the first go-round is where there is no communication, things are going to unravel fast, and it's going to be bad both for the borrower and for the lender. So if lenders continue to reach out to borrowers, the infrastructure is there. We know how to resolve foreclosures now in a way that we didn't the first go-round during the economic collapse in 2008. So, as long as lenders are open to, working through those issues with the borrower, Whether it is a resolution that keeps the borrower in the home, or, I mean, if it's not possible, liquidation to the benefit of the borrower through, deed in lieu or forgiveness of deficiencies and cash for keys opportunities. So there are ways that lenders and borrowers can work together when foreclosures start to uptick in order to, somewhat alleviate the pain that we're going to feel in the industry then.
Well, and if lenders aren't familiar with those programs, what are those programs that you just talked about? You talked about cash for keys and these other ways to help out the borrower. Is this something you guys are focusing on? How do these programs work?
So that is definitely something that our firm
We
focuses
try as
on.
much as we can to educate the consumer on what options are out there, but they are out there and available. And to Ben's point, it's communicate. Ignoring these situations only going to make it worse.
Right. Well, gentlemen, this has been wonderful. I know it's not a happy topic, but it's something we need to discuss, and it's your everyday. So I really appreciate you guys being here, educating me, educating our viewers and listeners.
Yeah.
And if you had one takeaway for our lenders, for operations, for borrowers, what would that takeaway be?
It would be weather the storm. We've seen the ebbs and the flows in the industry before. This isn't unique. The pendulum is going to swing back in favor of originations. Sometimes it swings to the default side, but we're going to go through a cycle. And if we all work together and collaborate, I think that the industry will come out stronger for it.
Absolutely. Chris?
Yeah, I really have to agree with Ben. I mean, he is the attorney, right? So, no, you have to stay the course. I mean, it's going to take some time to get out of this, but we will. But again, continue to communicate and educate yourself, and we'll all get through it.
Absolutely. That's a message that we're hearing a lot at this MBA. Keep educating, educate yourselves, your partners, your borrowers. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of MBA.
You too. Thank you.